Welcome back to the Intuition Incubator. Today, we are joined by Tim Shields, an adventurer whose life has been anything but ordinary. After trading his corporate career for one way tickets around the world, Tim has spent nearly 3 decades gathering wisdom from far flung places like India, Southeast Asia, and Berlin, which inspired his book, A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment. As a writer, editor, and collaborator with global thought leaders, including having ghost wrote the wildly successful Supernatural by Dr. Joe Dispenza, Tim's work dives into consciousness, human potential, and the mystical threads of quantum physics. Prepare for a journey, listeners, that covers the unfiltered, untamed depths of human transformation. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. I just have to clarify, I
So
wasn't the
excited to have
ghostwriter.
you.
Yeah. I was the editor, not the ghostwriter.
Oh, the editor. Okay, the editor. Hey, well,
Yeah.
still pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So I am super excited to talk to you today. I've heard you on several podcasts, and you talk about some things that I get quite excited about. One being unworthiness, and working on that program. And having been a couples therapist for many years, um, only to work out my own unworthiness program. We teach what we need to learn, right? As it related to my relationships. And that's kind of the topic of my TEDx when I really realized that I was dealing with an unworthiness program. And unwinding that is what led to uncovering that for my, as far as my love life is concerned. I believe that these programs are things that come up in all kinds of areas, all kinds of times over and over again. But I know that you also, do a lot of work with relationships and things like that. Um, so I'm really excited for the listeners to hear what you have to say today. And, there's a lot of avenues to go down. But why don't we start with you had a very circuitous, intuitive journey, really, throughout your life. Which, when I listened to it, it sounds like it was more in line with your intuition than out of line when I compare it to my own. But share with our listeners some about your journey and listening to your intuition, not listening to it when it happened, which way you went, regardless.
Wow. Well, I would say my inciting incident, as I like to call it, happened when I was 17. And three things happened, and actually a fourth thing, which I'll mention after that. But one was that I guess I went to a Grateful Dead concert and I took a huge dose of mushrooms. And I was like, wow, like something so much bigger is happening and I'm connected to it. And I felt this unity consciousness and this love. And wanted to be a writer. I decided I wanted to be a writer. I started keeping a journal at that age. And I wanted to be a writer so bad, I started asking to be used as an instrument of peace. Another thing that kind of I never really talk about, but it just kind of re entered my awareness was that was also the age where my family sort of lost our financial security. So that was kind of a program that I've been dealing with for many years because I'm like, oh my God, I want to be a writer. I want to be an artist. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make a living? Who's going to take care of me? All that stuff. But I just finished. Well, it's been finished for a while, but it keeps getting updated, and I think I finally landed on the central idea, which is now the title of the book, but it's called Dream Tethering. And I think, when
Hmm.
I was 17 years old, in my first book, A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, I said that the dream of the 17-year-old self is like shooting a grappling hook out into the future. And if you're strong enough, determined enough, and focused enough, you're going to get to where you're going. But the external environment is always going to try and knock you off the line. So I think there's some sort of combo of nurture and nature with me. I feel like in some way that me asking to be used as an instrument of peace really kind of locked in this tether. And there have been many times where I've wanted to get off this writing train. I'm just like, screw this. I'm going to go to Amazon and make a ton of money. Like, this is a very hard path. But I also can't imagine, any other way because I get to learn from people like Dr. Joe Dispenza. I just finished working with Dr. Zach Bush, which I think is going to be one of the most important books on public health of the century so far. And I
Wow.
mean, sometimes I'm just sitting at my desk, and I'm writing, and it's kind of just coming in, and I'm like banging on the desk, like, "Holy shit! I can't believe like I'm writing this right now." And it's not. I mean, it's me, but it's not me. Like I I said in this new book, I guess some people would say a channel, but I say more a code breaker because my mission statement was just dropped in one day while I was running along the beach in Gearhart, Oregon. Is I translate light frequency and energy into story so as to lead others to their truth. So what I'm really doing is, code breaking this kind of information that's coming in beyond the visible light spectrum and tapping into it. Everybody can do it. It's just it's just a matter of training your brain because we're so focused on the external environment and the 3D, but we're moving through endless information fields at all time. So, um, you know, I've been doing this for 33 years, even just as a journaler at this point, and it's like I I tap into you know, uh, that like vein of information, and then it's just coming through me. Like the new book, Dream Tethering. I mean, I don't think I'm really that smart, but I guess other people might say differently. But I could never have come up with this stuff on my own. It just kind of came
So,
through.
yeah. So, is that what you think intuition is?
Um, yeah, I suppose so. I mean, intuition is the whisper found in stillness, and
Yeah.
most people are just running through life, especially in our Western society, and it's like do the next thing, create, make the next money, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a massive spiritual awakening happening on the planet, obviously, but I think that is going to be accelerated, who knows, 100,000 fold in the next 2 years. And I don't know what
Mm.
that's going to look like. Nobody really does, but people are seeing through the bullshit of the program and, the matrix and the media and everything is programming and conditioning. And it's like we are programmed and conditioned to be these little beings when we are eternal divine beings. We are just having a human experience of eternity manifested in third dimension to gather information for our soul's journey. And, we couldn't, if we didn't have this body, we couldn't have these experiences and we couldn't have these feelings. And really, feelings, I think, are the gold of the third dimension. And it's like, but you have to learn how to work with your feelings. And, as Dr. Joe Dispenza would say, the thought sends a signal out, the feeling pulls it back. But most of us are sending a lot of thoughts out from unconscious programs or from wounds, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're, I'm not the first person to call it, but they're core wounds. I write about this in my new book, and it's like, this process of dream tethering is, first identifying what the soul ache is. When I talk about that in the first book, I go deeper into it in the second book.
Yes. I love that you call it soul
Yeah,
lake. I love
yeah,
that. Yes.
and so when you identify the soul ache, it's a lot of people want to run from it, but it's really like your spiritual GPS system. And if you can
Mm.
identify the soul ache, then you can cut those tethers that are holding you back because we all have, the soul ache is kind of this uncomfortable feeling that there's something more that there's something bigger for my life. There's something that I'm called to do, but maybe we're living, for our parents or for society or for a program that we need to make X amount of money to look and feel successful. But, once you can cut those tethers to the past, that's liberated energy to tether to your dream. So, the identifying the soul lake is then kind of answering the calling. And then, the
Mm.
next thing is like you create a tether, which is your sort of plan. And I'm doing it very simply. And then it's following the breadcrumbs, which is trust. Because once you start to get on this journey, all of these little breadcrumbs start showing up. And a breadcrumb on its own means nothing, but it's something that leaps out of the external awareness with a registering force in your consciousness. And you're like, well, that's weird, but you just move on. And then the next breadcrumb shows up. And then all of a sudden you have this series of, I mean, that is kind of intuition. You're tapping into intuition. You're expanding your consciousness and awareness. And when you expand your consciousness and awareness, you can see more in your field of awareness. Because if you're just living this unconscious life and you're going from work to the gym to whatever, you're in this like this myopic vision. But if you're in a greater awareness, you're going to see all these little clues that are in your field. So then the next step
Yeah.
is the dream tethering practice. And this is I would say an active state of surrender, but you're just doing the practices, whether that's meditation, a gratitude and intention journal. Walking is a huge part of my practice. I mean, you could be crocheting, it doesn't matter. It's like the practice, I believe, for me, it's writing, and it's a way of carving out a path to God, if you want to call it God, and whatever language you want to use for the engendering energy of the universe. Um, but the practice, for me, it's walking a lot, and I just put on my music, some music. Maybe it's like jammy or improvisational or melody, but it's like it stops the thinking brain and you go into trance. And before I start my walk, I ask the question that I need to solve, the creative question, what I'm stuck on. Like this whole book, I didn't know what I was writing about. The dream tethering book. It's like I gave my agent a
Mm.
bunch of stack of papers. He chose the one I liked best. And I just started writing. I just started moving forward into it. And I'd get to sort of the end of a chapter and I'd be like a little bit anxious, like, what's next? And then I'd just go up for a walk to this beautiful Native American land, this Palm Canyon. And I mean, it's just within a few steps, it would like, boom, the information would come in. I'd be like walking around, like scribbling like a madman to honor the muse when
Yeah.
she was speaking to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just the last thing
I
is,
love this.
yeah. Well, the last step is just the
Go ahead.
embodiment. So after so long, the dream tethering practices, you're pulling that possibility to you. And then one day you just awaken in that possibility, in that dream. Because that is the whole point, I think, of life is to embody this knowledge and wisdom. Because otherwise it's just intellectual mumbo jumbo. But like the reason why we have a body in the third dimension is to capture this information and to process it and turn it into knowledge and wisdom, I guess, for our soul and for our human journey.
Oh my God. All right. Well, there was a lot there. So
Boom,
many
I just
things
dumped it
to
on you.
follow up on.
Yeah.
Yes. And now I'm holding this big basket. Um, gosh, I'm thinking, oh, I got to ask that. I got to ask that. So, yeah. And it's interesting because I know that people in our world is very clear that there's an uprising of consciousness and that things are shifting. And at the same time, when I walk out into the real world, like there's a lot of people that have no idea what that even means. And and are very much just continuing on with the programming of what we're being fed and, in that stress state. And it's gosh, you said so many things. So one of the things that I love about your story is that it seems like from a young age throughout your life, you really paid attention to these signs. And I couldn't agree more that this body is here to help us work out whatever it is we're supposed to work out in this lifetime. And we know what that is by identifying our soul's wound. And it's a question of if we're going to take that on and what that takes to take that on. And if we're going to be awake and aware enough to really see it, which is what I feel is very related to intuition because we know when we're following it and we know when we're not. And I know you've had experiences of winding up, in jobs that were not in alignment, but you very quickly, you seems like you've always very quickly been able to shift and be like, wait a minute, what what is the crumb here that I need to follow? And I so relate to this story because I feel that so many of us, we miss signs all over the place because we're so seduced by the 3D world. And I just got off a call with a client who had this, beautiful little figurine of herself and her partner shatter for the second time. And the focus was on, how the partner was going to feel about it, blah, 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 blah. And of course, I'm thinking, this is interesting, you know? And as we're talking about it, she's like, well, yeah, like actually, like in the picture, my partner's fine, but my head's broken off now. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that interesting? Right.
Mhm.
And I feel that some people are really attuned to those signs. I sadly don't feel that I have been one of them for a long time because, like you said, things are happening all over the place all the time. But where is our attention? Our attention is somewhere else. And one thing you said at the very beginning is you said the outer world is always going to try to pull us off track. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Because it's a world of distraction. Um, you achieve your dreams by getting centered within yourself and staying focused on that what I call the dream tether. But like if you're going up this mountain, there is wind, there is snow, there's, you know, maybe some bighorn sheep or something. I don't know. But like I mean, this is a it's a dimension of, polarity, I guess. So that's the internal and the external. It's matter and energy. And, you know, I think when you get on this journey of dream tethering, well, first of all, I think it answers one question. So I should just formulate this that the first book is kind of about the dream of my 17-year-old self. And that was to be a writer. So I bought this one-way ticket to India to self-actualize this dream, to figure out what the story was. And I was like, I'm just going to live into it. And I was doing this gratitude and intention exercise. And what I was writing down was happening. So I was the creator of this story. And then the new book, Dream Tethering, is me 3 decades in the future talking to my 17-year-old self and teaching him everything I've learned about,
Mm.
consciousness, love, etc. Under the guise that time is a human construct. It's all happening right now, but we view time as this linear process. So if I can teach him these things now, it'll alter our current and future timeline. So what I tell myself that, you know, the 17-year-old self is, the central question to your life is, am I powerful enough? Do I believe in myself to
Mm.
become the creator, the executor, and the master of the dream? So I think when you get on this journey, the whole purpose of it is for you to learn and demonstrate your prowess as a creator from thought alone. Because we're so, you know, programmed to be out here, but nothing has ever happened before the thought of it happened. Skyscrapers, telecommunications, cars, like the thought of it occurred first. And I would argue that the thought was downloaded. It was like because
Yeah.
consciousness is
Yes.
downloaded.
Yep. Streamed.
Yeah. And
Yep. It's streamed.
so it's like
Hmm.
the thought is the first engendering principle. It was kind of all
What's
over the place.
interesting is, yeah, that's all right. That's all right. I know we both kind of screeched in here to this call, but what's interesting is like I've had those experiences that you're talking about where it's been a while now, but where I'm writing and I'm just like, oh my god, like this is gold. Like a lot of them, and I've written a complete book before, and I've rewritten that book and rewritten it, and I've all those things, and then I haven't done anything with it, right? And then whatever the programs are inside, I didn't have the good fortune of at 17 sort of having this drive and this belief, right? Like the unworthiness program really was running. And it's Elizabeth Gilbert talks about it in her book Big Magic. She says, you know, ideas, they if you don't pick them up and run with them, they will go find somewhere else to be. They will find another person to birth them, you know? And so then all of a sudden, what once had so much passion and so much excitement is sort of like dead in the water, you know? And I think when you and I were emailing, you know, I said, "Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you about many things, but one thing is because I'm a frustrated writer, you know?" And I think, yes, that question that you're raising, you know, like the central question is, do I have the strength and the determination and I don't know how you said it exactly, but to live out this purpose and to overcome the parts of myself that I need to overcome in this lifetime in order for this to come to fruition.
I mean, yeah, that sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no, you didn't.
Well, I mean,
No,
that
you
is
didn't.
the whole it's, as sort of la-di-da romantic, as it is, like, as it sounds, the the goal is great, but it's all of those interstitial moments of becoming along the way and all of those initiations. And when you come up against that, you have a choice to either go backwards or move into the next step. And when you jump into that next step, you have to surrender and trust. Like, that is what if I had to distill my work into one thing, it would be surrender and trust, because that's what I'm trying to master in this lifetime. I came up with this kind of new model of self actualization in the new book. So, if you think about self actualization in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it exists at the tip of a triangle, which, you know, suggests that it's some ultimate pinnacle or peak state from which there is
Right.
no surrender fall. I mean, no fall. But I was during lockdown one, I was in Texas and there was nothing to do except work with this woman and cook and go down to the Guadalupe River. So we had been talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I'm walking down to the Guadalupe River, and this image of concentric circles just pops into my mind. And it just kept coming in over time. And I wound up calling this the circlotron. So imagine, you know, a speck of light in total darkness, and that speck of light is you, and you are the center of the universe. And once the big bang happens, all of these waves of concussion, these circles move out. So imagine that all of these circles are levels of consciousness, and each circle is actually made up of infinite tiny little dots, and these represent possibilities in time and space at that level of consciousness. So you could be at this level of consciousness and just be having the same experiences, the same relationships, the same jobs, the same disappointments. So if you want to get to that next level of consciousness, you have to overcome, I think, one of three things: fear, trauma, or limited thinking. And um, I would say maybe because I've had all of them, maybe trauma the
There's
least, but certainly fear and limited thinking, and probably a lot of this stuff I have done, like buying a one-way ticket to India or moving to Mexico, or is has been to counter this fear, which was sort of my mother's, you know, fear bubble. It was like overprotective love, but it was really like the projection of her fear upon me. So, um, yeah, I mean, I just kind of in looking in my life like that. Whenever I've taken these big steps, I've had to overcome those things and just jump into the unknown. I mean, when I bought a one-way ticket to India and I landed in India, I was like, I made a huge mistake. I was just like in my hotel. I was in my hotel room for like 2 days, like, what am I doing? Why did I do this? What am I trying to prove? And then I just
yeah.
finally, like, I was also jet lagged, but I let go and I just started walking in concentric circles around the hotel. And I was like, wow, this is pretty wild. And then, everything unfolded from there.
Yeah, and I like concentric circles because I always describe, growth goes it's goes around and like we're all subject to the law of reoccurrence, and so it goes around and around. You grow sort of not linearly. You grow upward in concentric, circles as
Yeah.
well. And one of the things you mentioned, which is really a big message that I think is so important to get across, is this idea of overcoming self. And most times, right, people get very consumed with the goal is to get the money, to get the job, to get the girl. But if we were to change our focus to the success is not having gotten all of those things, but instead having overcome the part of self that needs to heal in this life and get excited about those wins, that's when something changes. And I wonder if you can share, obviously like moving to India and things like that, those are big things, but there's some that are more painful, right? Like, particularly when we're talking about dealing with relationships or unworthiness in relationships, sometimes we identify a part of ourself and we really like there's so much inside that does not want to manage it, doesn't want to deal with it, doesn't want to come up against it. And it could be like literally like inside, it could be just a simple argument with someone that a part of you is just saying, no, I'm right. I don't, blah, blah, blah. And then if you're on this journey, at least for me, there's another part that steps in and says, wait a minute, you're wanting to become a more open person. You're wanting to become a more vulnerable person. You're wanting, whatever these things are, you're wanting to become more loving or empathic or whatever. This is going to require you to get a leash on that part that so much wants to be right or is so afraid and make a different decision. And you kind of just walk through that. I wonder if you have an example of that, where it was really hard, but there was just something telling you, I got to do this.
Um, well, my mind kind of when you were talking to that went to relationships, and I I don't know if this exactly answers your question, but I I moved to Mexico for somebody, and after doing like a long distance relationship between Seattle and Mexico City, and I moved back down to San Miguel de Allende, which was where I had lived the first time when I met this person, and it ended like a month after me getting there, and I was like, oh my god, what am I doing with my life? And then I met somebody else like 2 or 3 months later, and 6 months later, that turned into a big old broken heart. So maybe my lesson is don't get into relationships in Mexico. But I'm still open. I'm still open to possibility.
That would be a very
That
materialistic,
would be that would be a very limiting.
rendition or interpretation, right?
Yeah.
Limited thinking.
But
Yeah.
one of the big things I learned in that is just like attracts like, wounds attract wounds. So, because I
Yes.
was like, how can I meet this person? Like, I just saw her across a bar and I was like, I gotta go talk to that woman. And, there was just this magnetic thing. And then, like, 2, 3, 4 months later, you find out all this stuff and you're like, how did that happen? And I was like, well, because we're energy
Yeah.
beings. And it's like, if I'm not healed and I'm not whole
Yep.
at a level of wholeness that I desire in somebody else, then I'm not going to attract that person. And then I had, so on my website at curiousyear.com, which is the website for a curious year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, the most recent blog or essay I did was quite a long time ago. And it was about those two relationships in Mexico. So um, I kind of sort of jerry rigged that for the new book. So that's the 12th key. And then the 13th one, it's
Oh,
about a lot of things, but it was my most recent kind of significant relationship. And I saw, I was on this, I was, I was on this beach in Croatia and it was like day 60 of 60 days of travel. I was heading home the next day and my ex girlfriend was in London at a Joe Dispenza workshop. And I was like, why every time that she texts me does my internal world go into chaos? And I was the one who ended it. And I've probably suffered more ending relationships sometimes and taken me long to get over than, that's a whole other therapist story. But, I realized, you know, so I did the same thing. I asked myself the question, why, when she texts me, does my internal world go into chaos? And like 10 steps later, the answer that was returned to me was because I haven't forgiven myself for the way I treated her. And this
Mm.
thought came
Mhm.
in so hard. It was like snot and tears start going down. And I've got a baseball cap on and, glasses. And I'm just like walking through all these tourists. I don't want them to think Americans are weak. So, no, I'm just kidding. So I wind up just walking for like a mile through these people. And I keep walking through the woods and I'm just a mess. And I lay down on this rocky beach and I start saying this Saint Germain mantra. And it's like, I'm the violet flame made manifest to heal the world. I'm the violet flame made manifest to heal the world. By the time I got to the third
Mm.
one, I was like, oh my God, I got it all wrong. It's, I'm the violet flame made manifest to heal myself. And
To heal yourself,
I
yes. Oh,
I was
so
like,
good.
I wanted to get up because I didn't want to experience these feelings, but like a voice just told me to like lay there and process it. And that's where that kind of message came in. And, through this whole thing, I just saw this wound that like went all the way back to fourth grade. And I saw these repeating patterns
Yeah.
all the way into this relationship. And I was just so, you know,
Mm.
devastated kind of by my own lack of unawareness. But you're not aware until you're aware. And as Maya
Right.
Angelou said, forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before you knew it. So that was one of the most powerful. I mean, you know, it was kind of a rocky ending and all that stuff, but I would say she's probably one of the most important soulmates of my life. You know, teach soul teachers because I think and I hope I finally got the lesson. But it's like you just that's
Yeah.
why healing is another big part of my work because that's what I'm trying to do. Trying to heal all these little tiny, you know, shatterings throughout life. That's a little
Right.
dramatic, but
Oh, I like to call them bone crushing
oh,
humiliations in
that's
my
yeah,
life.
that's well, I like that. Yeah.
I those are those too, but yeah, no, I love what you're saying, and one of the things that I really love about it too is that, a lot of people in the spiritual community are very much up here and and all you have to do is think and feel and then it all happens and all these kinds of things and that's fabulous, but we live in these 3D bodies and we have these 3D experiences and the work is that moment, right? And so becoming aware of that, just like you said, you're not aware until you're aware, and being able to see, like, oh, here's a part of myself that needs to get healed. I was just on a call with a group of people who are, would say they are higher conscious people. And, I think they are in a lot of ways. Like, it's a journey, right? We're all on different stages. But with everything that's happening in the world, it's like, we got to do something. We got to do something. And I was like, no, what we got to do is we got to do it in here. We got to do it inside.
Yeah.
We got to heal ourselves. That's what has to be done, and I love that message. And it sounds like what is it? The 13 keys is the name of your program
Yeah.
that
Live the 13
that you
keys.
really focus on.
Yeah.
It's about healing the self because and look at what happens, right? This whoosh of energy opens up into the universe when you make that choice. I talk about this all the time because it is true. You can pick somebody across a bar and it's because that's exactly right. It's the energy, right?
Mhm.
And you say, but I didn't know anything about them. But there's something else in you that knew. There's something that attracted you. And relationships are just such an amazing place to self actualize, to say,
Yeah.
what is it in this person that I need to learn that is showing me whether you stay with them or you're not? Like, I treat my marriage like that. Like, okay, what is my soul here to learn? What's happening? This is the guy that is teaching me that. So when I am
Yeah.
most irritated or most whatever, that's my opportunity to overcome something inside myself, right? And I think so many people can relate to dating and dating the wrong person over and over and over again. And the materialist 3D version of why that happens is, oh, my picker's broken. I just, that guy was a jerk and all those things. And I just need to go out and do it all over again, or not go to Mexico like we were joking about or whatever, No, it's healing inside yourself. It's knowing your worth inside yourself. And then you will attract the person that reflects that worth back to you.
Yeah. And I mean, everything from, the cell to the furthest reaches of the galaxy is a fractal, and including the human experience. So if it's like, if I can heal my little small part of the fractal, it has the potential to heal another part of the fractal. And you can't heal the world until you heal yourself. It's like you're just running circles if you're doing that mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, which so many people are.
Yeah.
And we all get caught up in that, right? Because like you said, I mean, the 3D world is alluring, I mean, to me, feels like I work out an unworthiness program in one area and it shows up in another. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
It's
well,
like a
now I
Rick
got to
and
work it out, in my professional life, or now I got to work it out with my writing. Clearly, I got to work it out with my writing, right?
Yeah.
You know, um, so I love that. I love what you're talking about there. You talked about some practices, and I think that your practices that you share in your books and whatnot are so accessible to people. And I think it might, for people who are like way down the path on this, right? But maybe not catching those though as we don't know them until we know them. But also for people who are just beginning on the path, who are like, oh, I don't know, is this real? Or whatever.
Mm.
Um, and you went through them kind of briefly, but I wonder, like, what do you feel like is the most impactful practice that let's talk about both sides, like the person who's like advanced and doing all the things, but still kind of coming up against, I've been to events and I do all this stuff and I meditate and nothing's happening. And the person who is like, what are you talking about, Tim? It's
Yeah.
like, no, these are happening because I'm a victim to the world.
Yeah.
What is that a different practice you would recommend to each of those people, or is it the same?
I mean, the low hanging fruit practice is gratitude intention journal. And this is something I've done religiously. I wouldn't say every single day, but as much as I can since October through 2010. So
Well,
I had a sick parents for like a decade. And when my mom passed
mm,
away, I thought I was ready. And then it was like the actual finality of it was like having a rug swept out from underneath me. And I was just untethered, lost, and a little bit desperate, just kind of finding my way in the world. And oh my God, this anchor's gone. And I mean, she was already gone kind of mentally, from Parkinson's and dementia a while before, but the finality is a different experience. And a friend of my sister's is kind of an energy healer person. And she was like, all right, I want you to, you're a writer. I want you to write down 5 things you're grateful for every day and 5 things you want to create. And you're going to find that the things you are
mm,
create today are going to be the things that you're grateful for in the future. And I literally write, today I am so grateful for. And then the next section, today I intend and create. Those are 2 powerful words. And I just was like, all right, screw it. I'll try anything. I wasn't working at the time. It's like I surrendered the money and everything. I was like, I want the right job for right now. I want freedom. I want super cool people. That showed up like a week later. And it was a 3-month contract. And at the end of 3 months, my boss was like, hey, do you want to, 3 more months? And I was like, sure, but I'm really leaving at the end of these 6 months. So at the end of 6 months, I'm taking off to India, and he's like, hey, would you be interested in working like 10 to 20 hours a week while you're traveling? And I was like, hell yeah, I would make American money in India. So then I had miles I flew home at the end of 3 months in India to surprise my family for a family reunion. And I wound up going back to Seattle and I stopped in the office for a couple days. And my boss was like, he pulled me aside. He's like, hey, you're going to need money to travel. Just bill me for 30 hours a week for the last 3 months of your contract. Well, 40 hours a week, 40 hours a week for the last. So I'm just
Oh my
traveling
god.
and backpacking. And, I have, I was like, I want, a new income stream. And that all these things were kind of happening. And I mean, they're so absurd. I had no connection to them. I had no, like, it wasn't like,
Yeah,
I need this to happen. It was just like, I'm going to throw this out into the universe.
which doesn't work.
Yeah. And I
Right.
can't tell you how many things that have happened out of that simple exercise. And people who have read my book, A Curious Year and the Great Vivarium Experiment, every couple chapters is my gratitude and intention, you know, exercises because it literally created the story arc of the story I was living into. I didn't know what the culmination would be. And it turned out to be a great
Mm,
story, kind of terrifying at moments, but um, great story on paper. The other thing is obviously meditation and walking. And, I was at Joe Dispenza's workshop. And the first morning I had a really challenging meditation. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? Like, just like feeling pretty bad, beaten up. And I was just like, just show me a sign. And I wind up talking to
mm.
this, woman at the break who I had just said hello to in the elevator before. She finds out who I am, what I'm doing, and she's like, "Oh my god, I'm like a part of this, like arts program in Miami, and we bring in speakers, and like I would love to have you speak there." And I mean, these are
Oh
big,
my gosh.
I've been a behind the scenes guy, even though I've never really wanted to be, but these are like big boys, like Salman Rushdie and Malcolm Gladwell, Mel Brooks, and I was like,
Wow.
I mean, I
Wow.
still got to land it, but this is what I wanted to create. I'm like, it's time for me to come out front. I want to start speaking, and um, another thing
Yep.
I talked about that like money and lack program that came out of 17 when my family lost their financial security. And I mean, I I made a couple decent moves. I'm obviously not retiring or anything, but like I turned, a 401k into some Apple stock a long time ago. So I have this money, but I've been terrified to touch it because in my mind I'm like, oh my God, this is like my retirement. I guess can't touch it. I gotta let it grow. And
Right.
I finally was like, screw it, man. It's now or never. And I hired this marketing and branding agency. And and they've been
Mm.
incredible because I'm like, I was trying to do everything on my own, including contracts, and that didn't work out too well a couple times, tell you that much. So you need the
Yep.
right team, and I had been asking for the right people
Well,
at the right time for years. Like I'm dropping this stone in the pond, and as Dr. Joe Dispenza says, when you drop a stone in the pond, that ripple goes out, but you don't know how big
yeah.
pond is, so you don't know how long it's going to take that ripple to come back to you. And I mean, I've been asking for this stuff for 20 years, 20, 30 years. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, I also know that as a writer, I knew as a young man, I was like, if I want to have big experiences to write about, if I want to have big things to write about, I have to have big experiences. And to me, that was travel. And I
Yeah.
just was like, open hearted, like, bring it life. I want to experience broken hearts, love, all that shit. And I've gotten a few of those things. And, but, um, but I have this enormous body of experience. And then I've had this opportunity to work with Dr. Joe Dispenza and Dr. Zach Bush, who gives me kind of this different toolbox of language to express these experiences. And hiring this marketing branding agency, it was like, okay, I've been investing myself in people for years, and it's like time to invest
Right.
in me. And I think also part of it is
Yes.
learning about the flow of money as energy, and I always think of
Yes.
stuff I'm doing as stored value. Like this book I created 3 years ago, all of these hiccups, and it's like now I'm finally ready, including my agent passing away. So now I'm looking for a new agent. And but it's like I
Mhm,
have this
mhm.
stored value, and they were like, we want you to do a podcast, which is another thing I always wanted to do. And so they're gonna all I have to do is show up and they're gonna produce it. And I
Uh-huh.
created the idea for this podcast 5 years ago, and it was just all of these files are just I created this idea for this show that a docu series I'm sort of helping bring to fruition now years ago. And it's just like you just have to like move into your passion, show up and do the work, and trust that when the time is right, it's going to unfold. Because I said in this new work, it's like when you tap into the dream and you get into that alignment of mind, body, and spirit, you become like the boring machine, like a tunnel boring machine. And it's like matter conforms to your will when you are in that energy, in the energy of the alignment of mind, body, and
Mhm.
spirit, which
Mhm.
comes about through
Yeah.
right thinking, right feeling, right action, and right language, I believe. And language is a big one that's, I'm really starting to play with again. Conscious language. Like one of my clients, we were working on that, but it's like I ran into somebody this week. And so I'm just speaking my intentions out into the world, and I love whatever. I love my life. I love my age and I love, this and that. And it's like, I don't know. It's all just an experiment in consciousness, right? And language,
Yeah.
language is like it's like the forging force to bring, you know, ideas into the concretization of something physical and tangible. So it's like you're summoning using language, you're summoning a possibility into existence. And a lot of that language begins on the inside. And I've had a lot of girls I dated, and they've been like, "Have you ever heard like the way you talk about yourself?" And because I have very high expectations of myself,
Mhm.
but writing, I think, out of all the arts is probably the longest journey because you have to have a significant body of life experience to say something significant. And,
Yeah.
two summers,
Oh
go
my
ahead.
okay. No, finish 2
Oh,
summers
two
ago.
summers ago, I was traveling, not this summer, the previous summer. I was traveling through Europe and I was supposed to be there for 7 weeks. And I came home at the end of 4 weeks, which is super unlike me. I was finishing my course, but I was just so tired of like finding the next place I was going to go and lodging and transportation. And I was like, I realized I was sitting at this sort of outdoor kind of beautiful, it was one of my two of my favorite days of the year that year. I was sitting in this kind of outdoor park with a little bar in it. And there were all these little olive trees that you could sit under. And I had so much information coming in. It was like I just like tapped the vein, and it was like I was writing and I was doing this whole video, like the artist journey thing throughout my whole time. And the huge insight I had was that I've been traveling and going into all of these experiences like I was that 36-year-old kid again, like that wrote A Curious Year in the Great Vivarium Experiment, which was like this very consumptive and extractive energy. I was just like, I want to squeeze everything I can out of life. And I'm writing every thought and feeling and interaction down and everything like that. And I realized I was like, "Oh my god, I'm not that guy anymore." And I'm very happy to put him to rest,
Mhm.
and like, thank you for everything that you've brought me to this point. But like now I'm ready to focus on my legacy, which is like a body of work that you leave behind for, future generations or whatever. And so that's kind of a big shift that came out of that experience. And yeah, I'm just ready to step into my own because I've probably been hiding in the shadows a little bit. But
Oh my god. I think we're on parallel journeys. What you're saying is so relatable. I a couple of years ago I just stumbled upon a woman, and she designed a whole new website for me, rebranded me and everything, and it was like this experience. I told her I feel like the Velveteen Rabbit. It's like I've finally become real. And now I have a team like that just came together in the last year. And then all of a sudden, this idea for our podcast, which, I never wanted, I didn't want. And it's like literally bringing me so much joy. It's the most joyful thing that I do now, other than visiting with my clients. And it's funny because what is underlying all of that, right? Like when you talk about being in the shadows, like I totally relate to that because there's so much fear. There's so much fear. And I think one of the ways that fear really comes out, it certainly came out for me this way, was a lack of clarity. It wasn't like if you're tapping into your intuition always knows, right? We know what we want. But I think the fear, at least for me, kept me from getting really clear. So it was like, well, I want to be speaking on big stages and I want to be, doing these things, but I don't even want to allow my brain to go there into meditation because what if it doesn't happen? What if it doesn't happen, right? And so when you talk about words, right, it's like the energy behind the words too, right? Because sure, I mean, 15 years I probably said, "Oh, I want to do this. I want to do that." But underneath was so much fear about what that meant if I failed or, all of these things that I just never really got anywhere. And it's funny because I was listening to you on a podcast and I was listening to your little practice and I thought, "Oh, I'm going to do that." So I started to do it and I was going for a walk. Um and I did it that morning or a couple mornings or whatever. I went for a walk and all of a sudden, I was so clear. I was like, "No, I want a podcast and I want to speak. That's what I want to do."
Yeah.
And it was like, and that's fine. I can say that. And if it never happens, it never happens. But why am I even going to think about that? Like I'm just really clear. And we talk about, when you put stuff out there, um, the universe can't get a mixed signal. If
Exactly.
it's getting a mixed signal, it doesn't know how to give you what you want, And so um it's been so long of that, but knowing like, hey, I want to work with people, I want to speak, and I want to podcast. And those are the places that I have the most joy. Right. But that exercise that you gave, like really just even just after a few times of doing it, and I've done things like that over the years. I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for that. I was like, no, okay, let's get real. And it really just it I was walking and it just dropped in, just like you said. And I think it's your message is so important also because I think a lot of times people think, I mean, you've been doing this work since, 2010 was when you met Dr. Joe, right?
Yeah.
You've been doing this work a long, long time, right?
Mhm.
And I think that people who maybe are just getting into the work or just understanding this idea of consciousness, they are thinking they're the only ones that have hard meditations, right? But you just referred to just having a hard meditation. And I've had those too, right? And when you can surrender in that moment, I remember walking on the beach once doing a walking meditation. I was completely freaking out because it was the middle of COVID. And I was like, if my family knew I was here, they would absolutely lose their minds. The world was going crazy. And I was working an event with, 1,500 people. And I had a cold and I was like, "Oh my God, I don't feel well. I must have COVID and then everybody's gonna have COVID. And what am I doing?" And I was freaking out and I'm going on this walk and I'm listening to the meditation and nothing's happening. There's no moment. There's no nothing. And I just said, "You know what? Just keep walking. Just be with it. Just let go, relax." And I got to a point where the very, very end of the meditation, the very end, I laid down. And the very last thing that happened in that meditation, I went through the whole walk, nothing happened. And I said, "You are not going to beat yourself up. You are not going to go through this like, oh, it's not the meditation I want, nothing's happening." And I laid down. And the last thing that was said in that meditation is, you can open your eyes where you get to experience everything that you create. And I thought, oh my God, I created this cold. I did this because I felt guilty about coming here and I was afraid what people were going to think and da, 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 da. And then I just popped up, and the next 6 meditations were amazing, right? Like, so it's a journey, right? I mean, we can get older and older and older, but it's okay. it's okay. There's no expiration date, on evolution and evolving.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I would say to that for people who are new. I went to my first kind of, it wasn't even advanced, it was like a 4-day workshop in 2015. And I was, I wanted to create a full time job and a mentor because I was always freelancing. And it was like every time that job ended, I'd have to change my energy and search for a new job. And it was like I couldn't get this, flow with my own book. So I'm literally, almost in tears after one meditation and beating myself up. And I'm just like, I'm not doing it right. Everybody's having these profound internal experiences. And
Yeah.
actually, at the last at the last meditation, I sat next to Hillary Hamilton, who became one of my best friends, and she's running the inner science research arm for Joe Dispenza now. And I we left. My sister and I went to Sedona after that, and a series of very magical things that are too much to go into started happening. So I'm kind of like, okay, maybe this is working. And I land in Seattle. I open my phone and I get this LinkedIn message from this guy who just left Microsoft. He's like, I'm working for this unicorn company. We need a writer. I think you should really check out this job. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So then I take the light rail into Seattle and I run into this guy on the street corner and he reiterates again, you really should apply to this job. So, I might not be smart, but I ain't no dummy. So I was like, okay, this is a sign. I got to pay attention to this. And so I wound up getting the job. And every day before work for 6 months, I went to a coffee shop for 30 minutes on a not so good day to an hour and a half on a really good day before I went to work. At the end of exactly 6 months, I finished this book. And I was so a curious year in the Great Vivarium Experiment.
Mm,
And I was so lit
mm.
up because I was like, "Oh my god, I think I actually have a book here. I'm doing it. This is what I set out to do." And as soon as I finished the book, I got laid off and I was like, "Yes." I'm like, "I'm just going to work on I'm going to take the government's damn money and I'm going to work on my book all winter." And I walked out of that building and I was so lit up and I was just like, and this is something I do sometimes too. I say, what amazing thing is about to happen to me today? And I kid you not, 3 minutes later,
Yeah.
I get a text from Dr. Joe Dispenza's assistant asking if I would help him with, his blog. And,
Yeah.
what I've learned and what I tell other people, and they seem to find a lot of solace in this, is that you don't have any expectations. You don't have to have any profound experience. You just have to carve out the time to be still and create that intention
Yes.
and trust that it's going to show up.
Mhm.
So it's like I've had a couple profound in the new book. I talk about one very profound experience I had in meditation, but 99% of the time I don't. But I now know that when I do that internal work, it is reflected in my external world and like magic and serendipity and synchronicity happens. I mean, I put Dr. Zach Bush in my mind movie. And if you don't know Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, it's kind of like a digital vision board. And I put Zach Bush in my mind movie and it said, I work with the best
Wow.
people in the world.
Wow.
And 26 months later, I got invited to this little private research thing at UCSD, and I knew Zach was going to be there, and there was only about 14 people, and I'm like ready to stalk this guy like a cheetah stalking a gazelle on the Serengeti. I'm just like watching him, and we wind up walking to the lab together, and there
Yeah.
were four of us, and he said, "So how are you involved in this?" And I was like, "Well," and I was like, I'm trying to come up with something clever, but I got nothing. And then Hillary was like, "Oh, he used to, write for Joe." And Zach was just like, "Really? Are you available?" And I was like,
Oh
"Fact, mate."
my god.
And by the time we got to the lab, he asked me for my number, and I was like, "Shit, man, this is how easy it's supposed to be when you
That's
just
how
trust." But I
easy
mean,
it
there
can
was like
be. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was like a year where I'm like, how do I find this guy? How do I track him down? I had some mutual people, and one of them was kind of protective of their relationship, and but yeah,
Yep.
now and I mean, I'm like so grateful and humbled to work on this book. I can't wait for it to get out into the world. It's just going to blow people's minds.
Well, it's funny that it's not funny, but I have 2 more questions for you, and the next one, of course, and was going to be about that book, and I'm sure energetically, somehow that was transmitted because that's exactly where you went with that story, which wasn't starting there,
Yeah.
I don't think. So I would love to hear, and then I'm gonna ask you one last question, but I would love to hear anything you can share about, and many listeners, may or may not know about Zach Bush, but what can or do you wanna share most about that work? And I know well, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
leave that to
I
you.
mean, I don't know how much I can say at this point, but I will just say his lab was the first lab to really detail the glyphosate injury across biology, across the entire planet. And if you don't know what glyphosate is, it is these horrible herbicides and pesticides that are poisoning biology, poisoning the plants. We're eating the plants, it's poisoning, and and glyphosate is basically like a molecule or two off of Agent Orange, which is what we sprayed in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia during that
Mm,
war.
mm.
And it is, you know, it's a water soluble molecule. So it seems like it just gets washed away, but it actually gets absorbed into our bodies and everything like that. And um, if you don't know, if you've never heard Zach Bush talk, I mean, just go to any podcast and listen to him. He's this triple board certified doctor with this incredible story um, about, just waking up to what a racket the pharmaceutical industry is. And so he kind of left academic research, started to started this clinic in a rural food desert in Virginia, and he was trying to heal people with food, and he couldn't figure out why this wasn't happening. And then one day, somebody brought this this white paper about soil systems, and that went him down this whole rabbit hole, which had him discovering glyphosate and what it's doing to the carbon in the soil and destroying our soils and all that stuff. But more than that, I mean, this guy is such a poet and a mystic. Like he will take you in
Mm.
20 minutes from, the mitochondria within the cell to the furthest reaches of the galaxy, black holes, etc. And you're just like, what the hell did I just hear? But I mean, he just taps in. He is definitely channeling something. And he is just such a beautiful, extraordinary soul. And I really am excited for what we're going to do together, and the message that he's bringing into the world, because it's a very, very important, very needed message, and I believe it's going to shake
Yes.
things up and create a lot of change
And wake people
and
up
wake
to what's
people up.
really
Yeah.
happening.
So,
Yeah.
Dr. Zach Bush, just go to
Yeah.
Spotify or any place to find a
Awesome.
podcast.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. Okay, the last question is this. For the person who is listening to this or is bogged down with the traffic that they're in or obsessing about, the work item that they've got to do or the client that's upset and like so narrowly focused on their environment and who's upset about what and what they have to achieve and how they've got to achieve this so that they can feel this way and that way, who's in that spot right in this moment and having a hard time processing to just, you know, what might be interpreted by their left brain at this point is like, oh, just for work, start driving when, everything feels like it's the most urgent thing in the world. What do you want to say to that person?
Well, I would say just take a pause, close your eyes, take 10 deep breaths, and put your energy and awareness on your heart when you take those deep breaths, and like just pause so you can break this juggernaut of a program that's just spiraling
Mm,
in your mind. It's easier said than done, but find a way to move into gratitude. And, you know, it's
Mm.
funny because one of my sisters was always like, I don't know, I always write the same thing, like I don't know what to write for the gratitude intention thing, but like, I mean, move into gratitude for your health, move into gratitude for like, I mean, I had this little kitten show up in my world like a year ago and I'm
Oh.
obsessed. He's like a little, I mean, I think he was a human and he is a little Zen master because I have just, he has been a mirror of like the blind spots and like some wounds around love. And, it's been incredible. But, every morning I'm like, I just sit outside by the pool and I do my gratitude intention exercise. And this morning he just like came up and like curled in my lap. And I'm like, I never thought I could have an animal because I just traveled and moved around so much. But like, I'm so grateful for this little being. And the one thing that's
Mhm.
really that's been really powerful is he's really helped me to focus on the present moment because I realized that I'm not gonna have him forever. And I was sitting in the vet
Mm.
like the day he got neutered and I just this thought came in. I was like, when the cat passes, I'm gonna be devastated. And I mean, talk about like, wow, what an old wound that is, like about loss and everything. But it's really like he just I'm really grateful and present, like all the time I get to spend with him. And I'm grateful for the people I get to work with, for these conversations I get to have. And I'm grateful that I get to, you know, that my 17-year-old self had the courage to dream this dream. And it has not been an easy path, but like
Mm.
I get to, you know, take people's ideas and bring them into language for the masses. And that process for me is transformative. And as a writer, like when I tap into that stream of consciousness, that flow, it is like, it's like I'm touching God. It's like this, it's an electrical
Mm.
feeling that's just coming in and I just know not to judge it. It's like my higher self is just lecturing these words to me and I just keep my fingers moving and I don't think and I don't judge and I just listen to the voice and it comes through. So, long, long, long way of saying break the program, even if you have to say out loud, stop, pause, close
Yeah.
your eyes, move into your heart, slow down, take some deep breaths, move into gratitude.
Mm. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tim. Where can people find you if they want to? We'll put all this in the show notes as well, but how can they engage with you?
Okay. My Instagram and TikTok is the real Tim Shields. Um, and that's also my website, the real Tim Shields. My first book is A Curious Year. Live the 13 Keys is sort of the coursework for this book before it's even come out. And I also have uh, the real Tim Shields on YouTube. I'm going to start really moving into and pushing these things. And I would love more followers because I call it the pop culture crap machine. Like, even though I have all this experience, I've been rejected by one or two big houses, publishing houses, because I don't have a huge social media following.
Right,
Because I'd never put my time into it because I'm actually
right.
producing things for the real world.
You're
Yeah,
producing.
I once
Yeah,
heard like
exactly.
having a huge social media following is like having monopoly money, but I'm sure there's
Yeah.
there's more ways to
Well,
leverage,
I'll
but
subscribe to you if you subscribe to me.
absolutely. And I really actually like I'm going to use this as a platform to actually sort of get my message out and kind of be a bit more sort of I don't know. I don't the word's not revealing, but I'd share more deeply what I want to say about the world.
Yeah,
So
which I think needs to be heard. So,
yeah, I
thank you so
appreciate
much
that.
for being here.
And thank you so much for reaching out. And I love these talks. So I always feel so inspired afterwards. So thank you so much.